Okay, let's get started. Again, thank you for showing up to the webinar. We're going to do law enforcement crisis communication, responding to a use of force incident. Uh, Jim Satterfield is going to be our presenter. He is the president and founder of Crisis Risk Strategies, LLC. Had a long relationship with LGRMS and ACCG and GMA, and take it over, Jim.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate the intro. I was trying to get Dan to sing for everyone, so you have that mental picture hanging over you as we talk today. We're going to focus on excessive use of force. You expect law enforcement to need to use force, what they're doing in response. But the key question comes, is it excessive? And when does it change to excessive? And what do you say and what do you need to do? So we're going to focus on crisis communications, but then we're also going to give some things that we recommend that you do. We've shared this information with legal counsel for local governments and giving them the picture of what's going on. But we wanted to focus today, in particular, on the communications around excessive use of force. And I'll delineate it with some actions as we go along. And that next line there that says words matter. And the words that you select will have a difference and will resonate differently among the people that you're speaking with. So we want to talk about that. To the right of your screen, you'll see certified crisis coordinator. That's a program that we're doing with all of the entities that Dan just listed, and it's to train people to be able to recognize events that are starting to occur, identify those that are likely to accelerate to a crisis, and then to alert leadership. And if you can take that training and it comes to you at no cost, courtesy of all of the organization. So that's something that within your group you want to have some people that are familiar with it. And I would encourage that it can be more than one. All of that's e-learning and can be done online. Let me just give you a couple of ground rules around these types of communications when we talk about excessive use of force. Now, if I can just get my screen to advance, which it did perfectly, and I was ready for it. There it goes. And the first is, if you're explaining, you're losing. If you find in any crisis event, particularly an excessive use of force, that you're trying to explain, well, the reason we did that was this, and going, you're talking about the wrong thing. You're talking about the problem, not the solution. So, as a general rule, in these types of events, we do not want to be in a position. So, if when someone says we need to get in front of it, we need to frame the position, that's the wrong direction and the wrong things to do. In all of these events, your words matter. If you say, well, I know how you feel. Well, have you had a child die? And if you haven't, then you don't know how I feel. So selecting your words really make a difference. The past matters. What's happened in your county? What's happened in your town? What's happened in our state? Because that's going to frame the events that are occurring right now in light of that history and what's occurred before. So the past really is going to be an interpretation of what's going on at this point. But the key element to remember is the future matters more. People are going to be concerned about what's going to happen. Is it going to happen again? How do we get through all of these things together? So in this area, as you can imagine, becomes a blame game. All of the particular crises that you see listed there, and we could list many, many more, become weapons. They become weapons for someone else to use to generate a response and to create difficulty. We've seen discrimination. In a lot of these elements, excessive use of force is a specific example. And they want to use this use of force as a weapon against your local government, your local police, your local sheriff's department in that cycle. Now, where is the listener? You've got to look at all of these things, and the listener's going to hear and process what's said through their filters. What's occurred before around them? What are their feelings about these individuals? What are the relationships that were there? So you don't get a clean slate to deliver a message. You get the bias that is already there that's coming into that, And you've got to keep in mind, if you're helping with saying, this is what we ought to say, where is the listener? How are they going to be perceiving what you're saying and communicating coming in? This is just a high level set of insights to think about. Understand that what you're facing right now is going to be different than most other events. Hopefully, you're not going to face an excessive use of force incident within your entity, or even worse, if there'd been a death or multiple deaths or protests or riots that come as a result of it. Almost everything you learn initially in a crisis is wrong. Well, we didn't know about it. Yeah, it turns out you did. Well, we didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, it turns out you did. The impacts from that event will likely be traumatic. And the people that are being impacted are going to be in a different position of how they listen and the actions that they take associated with it. The words that you or your people use will shape the outcome and the consequences here. And so that becomes an important element. It's just not, we're going to say one thing, people are going to believe it, it's going to be done, we're out of here. Not going to be happening. Your initial focus is to let people know that you're concerned and you're doing all that you can to help them. What do they need to do now? So we'll talk about, and we'll go through the crisis ABCs, and if you've gone through the crisis coordinator training, you're familiar with that. But we'll share some of that today because it's important to know we're going to focus on, when we say crisis ABCs, that's anger, blame, and concern. Anger and blame look at the past. Concern looks to the future. So we'll clarify that more as we go. So here's our agenda. What's the need for this? Why is this even important for us to talk about? We're then going to go into crisis and some questions that you should expect. We're going to talk about attorney inclusion and attorney-client work products and building that and involving an attorney as early into the process as you possibly can. The ABCs of crisis that I just referenced, we'll go into that in more detail. Use of force considered excessive. It's not use of force, it's when it's excessive that we're going to talk about. We'll give you two different checklists. We'll break those apart and give you some ideas. And what those checklists are designed to do is to put you back in control. And you'll see on the next slide that we'll bring up that crisis is defined by a loss of control. We'll explain that more. And then we'll give you some tips, some tools, and we'll close with a crisis risk Miranda warning. You've all heard the term Miranda warning repeated in every police show on television or radio, enough to be a radio. Let's listen to that. So that's our agenda. I promise to end on time, and we are leaving the communications function, the questions function open. So if at any time there's a question, if you'll type it into that, Dan's going to be monitoring, and he can hold them to the end, or he can just come right in at that point and ask a question. We'll include it because we would like this to be interactive as best we can. So let's begin. The dandelion you see there, if you have a dandelion in your yard and you start to see the little seeds coming up, you're not going to have one plant. You're going to have lots of plants. And that's the key element to think about when you think about crisis. Crisis is defined by a loss of control. If you're in control, then it's business as usual. It's when that control function is lost that's when the crisis begins. So a crisis is not business as usual. It's business unusual. Most entities and companies and organizations have processes, procedures, and controls to address business as usual circumstances. It's when it's not as usual, when the control has been lost, that's when the crisis element comes in. Thinking about the excessive use of force allegations is an example of that. We want to clarify that some more. Now, as these events start, there's going to be questions, and people are going to be demanding things. Who are the internal and external stakeholders? What are their areas? What's the records retention policy? What's going to happen next? What's our plan? What's occurred? Legal counsel needed? Who is the spokesperson and what training they have? What are your concerns? What are the threats, risks, and vulnerabilities? Could we have demonstrations here? Are there going to be protesters coming? All of this is happening quickly. Now, in the government sector, the local government sector that you have built a great career in and wondering, Then we have people that have been elected to office. We have people that have moved into administrative positions. And so all of those things come together, and the pressure to speak is going to be overwhelming. So we need to be able to deal with that and know that's the environment that we're operating under in an excessive use area. So as we move from there, I want to start thinking some about the legal aspect of this. Now, transparency versus open tell all. You'll have somebody that's going to say, we got to get on the record. We got to tell everything we know. Well, legally, you may not be entitled to tell everything you know. Some of that is depending on what charges could be brought, what arrests that may occur, what other involvement would be in. So there's a difference between transparency, telling them what's happening, versus being an open book and telling everything and giving everyone's access to records. In any of these crisis events, and particularly in the use of force, there's going to be open records requests that are coming in where they get a letter saying, I'd like to see the training that this person had, or I'd like to better understand if you had previous incidences about that. So as soon as there's an event here, that's a point in time when you want to include the attorney that's involved in any communications going back and forth. We'll also give you some tips about how to deal with your city council or your commissioners and briefings that can and cannot take place, and making sure that documents become attorney work product limits the discoverability of that. And if some disclaimers that we will work through in getting it done. So at the very beginning of this escalation, this excessive use of force allegation, you need to be thinking about it from a legal perspective. I'll also go ahead and tell you, if you haven't contacted GMA or ACCG or LGRMS to get the insurance provider involved, you made a mammoth mistake. They have assets and resources that will make a tremendous difference. And we need to get them involved as early as we can, because at that point, that open book that you see on the table is not going to be what you do. You don't want to have all of your information out and available to everyone, because as they find out more, it's going to trigger more pressure externally. Now, in looking at the crisis ABCs, we're talking about what's the reaction and what's the extent. So in any event that occurs, people are going to react. And as I told you earlier, anger and blame look to the past, concern looks to the future. As you're thinking about this event that's occurring, who are our stakeholders? Who is involved in this? What are they angry about? How angry are they? What are they blaming us for? And what are they using to base that blame on us? And is there concerns about, is it going to happen again? What's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to our neighborhood as a result of that? We've seen violent reactions to these excessive allegations. So we first need to understand the anger, blame, and concern. And then we need to understand the extent of it. How bad is it? What's involved? The spread, the speed, and the setting. The number of people that are aware of. 5 people aware of this, or are there 10,000 people? Speed, is the rate of the consequences starting to rise as a result of this? And then are we the lead story in the Atlanta Journal or the Penny Saver? Are we the lead story on CNN? All of those are different scenarios. And depending upon the context of it, given an example, this crisis today is excessive use of force. They're going to be framed in those areas. So understanding that, and you have at your disposal tools that help you measure and plot that so that you can share that with the people in your organization. What happens is we measure that anger, blame, and concern, you'll see along a horizontal axis, and the spread, speed, and setting along a vertical, I reversed vertical and horizontal. The spread, speed, and setting is horizontal. The anger, blame, and concern are vertical. And so if it's low, you're in a guarded area where you want to focus on what do we need to monitor. If it's elevated, then we want to manage our response. If it's severe, we have to mitigate impacts. This is a useful tool because when you look at your situation, regardless of what the crisis is, it's a specific data point in one of those little boxes. And then based upon your response, you can see it de-escalate or escalate even more. And it's a way to track it. So the crisis coordinators have access to tools that allow them to answer the questions, and it will plot it for them and carry forward. There is also a tool called a virtual crisis response advisor, and it asks you two questions. First question is it before, where you need planning and training? Is it imminent, you're trying to prevent or mitigate? Is it at a point that it's going on right now, so you've got to manage this? Or is it after, and how you return to a new normal? And so that does, and then you have the ability to say, here's the crisis that I'm dealing with. Excessive use of force is an example of that, but it could be other things that come and impact you. So as we think about all of these things, it leads us to a point that, guess what, they're crisis traps. And you do not want to fall into those. And they're the common ones that we see repeated over and over. We'll talk specifically about dealing with excessive use of force in a minute, but I want to frame that with this background on crisis traps. First, it's a surprise. Now, I tell everybody that the last time a surprise was good for me, I was 5 years old, and it was my birthday. It's going to come as a surprise. You're not sitting around there looking for this. It's now caught in it. If you surprise people, generally their initial responses are suboptimal. So recognize that you're walking into an event where you're catching people in that level. What I've already shared with you in an earlier slide is everything you learn initially in a crisis. We didn't know. Yeah, you did. Never had this. Yes, you have. The facts will change over time. And so what you think is a fact on day one will later turn out and not be one. Now, the second slide that I put up said, if you're explaining your route, you'll probably hear me repeat that multiple times as we talk today. But getting out and trying to talk your way out of it is a problem. Look at the fourth trend. Elected officials love a microphone. I've found very few officials that get elected who don't want to go on camera, have their picture passed around, and be able to talk about it. We want to keep them out of it. We know what's going on and can better handle those redirections. By the way, the mic's never off. The mic's off. Don't worry about it. Yeah, it's on. It's going to come. Off the record is on the record. And regularly I'll talk to someone locally who will say, well, look, the guy that runs the radio station, he's not going to. The people that put out the newspaper, they're my friends. They're not going to do it. Walter Cronkite died zillions of years ago. Media today is different. Their goal is to sell advertisements. It leads, and this is the type of an event that they want to track and to put into leverage. So the media is not going to be your friend, not going to be able to talk your way out of it, dealing with your media contacts. Press conferences and town hall meetings are negative visual images. Imagine you got a camera there and you got people who are angry and shouting, screaming and waving things. Is that the image that you want your entity to be associated with? There will be videos and recordings of hearings, just what we've seen with the excessive use across the country. Someone comes forward, everybody's carrying a cell phone, and that's capturing it, and immediately that will start to come out. And then finally, this is going to be talked about on social media. Remember that line at the bottom. Crisis is defined by a loss of control. Our goal is to try to keep you from hitting these traps and to remain in control throughout it. Now, the media is definitely.
Hey, Jim.
Right. Yes, sir.
I got a question here, and it's kind of a question / statement. I understand this is about excessive force, but nowadays, can't you say that about that all of this is likely to happen, even if it's not excessive force situation?
Yes. If we're dealing with sexual abuse, if we're dealing with financial crimes that are created, any of these things, that's why we talk about crisis traps as opposed to excessive use of force. I am going to give some tools that are specifically for excessive use of force in a minute, but you're exactly right, Dan. This applies to any crisis event that you become aware from within your county or your city. These are things that will help and improve the outcome. Okay? The media is not your friend. Leadership must resist this urge to talk. And that's going to be one of the hardest things that you're trying to do if you're trying to support your leadership to keep this profile down. It is better to portray not returning the call than giving the wrong answer. What I would recommend is you tell, if the calls come in from the media, thank them for their call, get their name, get their affiliation, newspaper, radio, whatever, and their contact information, and have people say, and I'll pass that on. They not say, and they will call you back, because quite frankly, we're not going to call them back. Knowing who's following the story, that's someone that we can use open source intelligence, track and see what the comments are that are coming. The little box there with the reporter, it says, "This is Jane Smith with ABC. I understand that your organization has been served with a civil lawsuit alleging excessive use of force. Enter John Jones, blah, 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 blah. If we don't hear from you by 3 p.m., we'll publish the story we have." We see virtually those exact words in every crisis, because the media is trying to make you think that you have to talk, put you in a worse position. If you talk, you're going to put yourself in a worse. Press conferences are not good. I talked about town hall meetings. I'll probably hit that one more time before we end. You do not want to give a stump speech or gain political favor. We don't want to have this press conference. Look at all those pictures in the background with cameras and things. Just the visual image alone says we're in crisis. We're having a problem. We don't know what we're going to do. And it's their advantage to portray you negatively at that point in time. Now, resist the microphone. Don't forget that microphone's always on. Oh, we've cut it off. No, that's why you hear all those people have said the really stupid things associated. And we do not want to put the microphone in the hand of someone who doesn't understand what's going on, starts to talk. That's going to be upset. Leadership takes a microphone. They must be sure they're speaking to the right audience at the right time with the right message. They should know why they're speaking. And there's a rule of 5 that we will train. Somebody says, well, we need to talk about this. We ask why, and they'll give you an answer, and it's probably pretty good. You ask why the second time, it's okay, but not as good. You ask why the third time, and they're like, well, I'm not so sure about 4. They're going, okay, we don't need to talk. Do not need to talk until you know what's going on, until you're in control in that situation. Early comments will make this problem definitely different. By the way, one additional trap is any interpersonal conflict. I know this will come shocking to you. We've responded to where the fire chief and the police chief have different opinion. There's different between individual council members, other people that are in there. Those relationships, those personal conflict problems, are going to make this crisis worse. You need to understand that's an opportunity that's going to exacerbate the crisis as it comes in. Now, in the town hall meetings, is this too subtle? They're a bad idea. We see more things that are said in those meetings where we've had an administrator or manager come up and make statements, and then comments from others that come into, and it's just going to end up with anger and blame coming in. Facts are still being learned, and the visual impact of that group with angry people who are shouting out become a particular problem. Now, there are tips around running town hall meetings. If you're going to do it, have people sign in, have them favor first your local residents over people from out of town, and then have it managed by a clerk, not by an elected official. And you take them in order and you give them 3 minutes and they can speak, but it's not a Q&A session. You're not there to talk back and forth. So if you need to have to hold this, the last resort, that's the way to get through it and get to the other side. Also, responding isn't always necessary. We don't, just because we got a Facebook post or a text message or an email or a call, doesn't mean that we have to respond via that same media and medium. And so we want to look at this should not be putting pressure on your organization at all in the situation. So as we think through this, we're going to give you, you have access to two checklists. First one is the initial when it comes in. The second is a response when the public responds to the use of. The initial is when you've learned of it. The second one is when you are having to respond to that use of force. Now, I know you can't read this. I'm going to break it up into slides and go through and explain each one. But this sheet is designed to put you and your leadership in control. It's the areas that are set where you see the lighter color. You can type directly into it. Then you've got a document. I would do this in coordinating with your local counsel. To make legal counsel so that we make sure we have attorney-client privilege around it. We're going to break into this a little bit more. You'll see the checklist number one, the guidance that comes with it. Most of the information reports are wrong or incomplete. More information is going to come out. There's video. Expect protest and outside agent engagement with agendas. There are people in Georgia, I can say, somebody's going to drive in from Atlanta associated with media or some group protecting another group, and they're going to have an agenda to come in. There's going to be lots of threats. Some of those threats may occur. Most will not. Look for who individuals involved with previous use of force experience, expect it to come out. So, we had a problem with him last year or 2 years ago. Expect individuals in the media to show up at monthly and town hall meetings. It's about money. Ultimately, a payment will be made. If it's found that you had an excessive use of force event, there is going to be a check written and a payment is going to be made. That's where this thing ends up. So where do you start? First thing I want you to do is to request an investigation. It should come from the sheriff, from the police chief, from the mayor, from the county manager, city manager, someone else. Independent third-party investigation. Last in the state of Georgia with the GBI, the Georgia Investigation. I would contact them sooner than later. Now, this is another example to go to the question that Dan asked me. This could be true in any area. So if there'd been an allegation that there's been embezzlement or fraud or favoritism, you want an independent investigation. Now, I know everybody on our webinar today is a big fan of the IRS. Boy, I love paying my tax. But, I'm here from the IRS and I'm here to audit you. It's not a sentence that anybody really wants to hear ever. But in this situation, if we turn it over to someone else, they're doing the investigation. The IRS does not let you self-audit. Jim did his taxes. Hey, guys, it's right. I'm entitled to all that. You don't even look at it. The IRS isn't going to accept that. They're going to want to do their own investigation. Well, here, if you turn it over to the GBI, now that takes pressure off and eliminates the cover-up allegations that will come in these events. You turn over all the information to that independent investigator. And when a question comes in, you go, we don't have anything, we turn it all over to the GBI. Refer all questioners to that third-party investigator and wait for the investigation report to act or speak. Turned everything over to the GBI. We're waiting to hear from them. By the way, if you guys find out something, let us know. Now you're in a completely different role. One other side thing that happens here on some occasions is you go to turn it over to them. The GBI looks at it, says, there's not anything for us to investigate here, that this doesn't rise to that level. If that comes back, then that's like an exoneration. We went to the GBI, we turned everything over to them, and they made a decision that there was. So notify your insurance provider ASAP. If you ask about that, they've got resources. We work with them and to provide crisis management, crisis response assistance, messaging support. Have the insurance company or outside attorney retain any resources you use because you don't want it discoverable in the process. You want somebody that's managed a crisis before. We're in the middle of football playoffs now. You don't want to bring in somebody who's not been there before. You want somebody that's seen it and understands. And I don't want you to forget it's going to be about money. Ultimately, some kind of payment's going to get made. And then you need to monitor open source intelligence. There are tools that are available that don't cost you any money. There's a search that Google allows you to set up that's recurring and can tell you who's involved and what's going on. And the training in the crisis coordinator program and in the VCRA teaches you how to set those up so that your staff can back through it. But let's get the insurance team on board as early as you can. And they're going to say, have you started? Have you already spoken with? And they're going to give you the name of an attorney. Now, we don't want local leadership out discussing the matter. We've got an investigation going on. They're going to feel pressure. They got elected. They want to talk about it. They want to be it. They're going to want to talk. They don't have to respond to every call, every email, every text, or every inquiry. We can provide them some training. You can work with them. As you can appreciate, I can't talk about an open investigation. What I can say is we turn it over. Yeah. As you have described, that sounds serious. Now, you notice that as you described is different than saying that's what happened. So working some with them to do that. Use the home bases. Home bases are what defines your local government entity. What's your mission? What's your objective that you're doing? What is your statement about that or your vision? That's what defines you, not whatever's been used here. Your job is to invent the future, to make sure this doesn't happen again. And finally, that our hearts go out to that. So you talk about your mission and your vision. You also then talk about continuous improvement and then focusing on the people that were directly impacted. And then think of what your questions are and then you write answers to it. Avoid scheduling a formal meeting, and that's going to create all the hostility will come out. If you have to meet with people, meet with them in smaller numbers in that area. And don't brief everybody at the same time. Now, let me talk a little bit about that. Do that at some. Remember, most everything you get initially is going to be more information is going to come out. There is going to be that video I told you. Expect protesters. Threats will be made. Look at the individuals involved in prior work. Expect individuals to show up. It's about money. What do you need to know? What is the date that it happened? And you received it. Give a brief description of what occurred, the people involved internally and externally. This will change. And if you're working with local leadership, don't open it up and go immediately into executive session because it says, we had an executive session about this. Also, if you meet as a group, then an open records request can come in. You can do a briefing with one or two at the direction of legal counsel that you can start to share that information, but yet it won't be worded out, coming out in a wider cycle. So I'm going to go back to that checklist where I took the top part of it back and say, request the independent investigation, contact the third party, turn over all the information for all questioners to that third party, wait for the report to act, and preserve evidence. Notify the insurance counsel. And you see, in each one of these columns, it's who did you assign this to? You assign this to me? Did you assign it to Bob? Who's got it? And the date. And so that you know who is responsible and seeking outside legal, monitoring the open intelligence. Also on that checklist is inform local leadership not to discuss. Stop leaders from wanting to default or defend. Leadership does not have to respond. Provide training, as you can appreciate. What I can say, use the home bases. By the way, if you don't have a vision or a mission statement for your local entity, that's something really good to have your elected leadership work on with your department heads to say, we're about creating the best environment for families or generating opportunities for employment. Whatever it is, that's your home base, and you want to be able to stick with that and describing what does define it. Avoid scheduling a formal reporting meeting. If necessary, meet with multiple groups in smaller numbers. We've responded to some events like this where we brief people in ones, twos, and that way it doesn't become discoverable and spread out. And then identify victims. If someone was killed or injured, it's going to be their family, their neighbors, Who else is involved in it? It could be a church or a pastor that's involved and getting involved. Speak with their attorney to offer access for help. And again, your insurance provider is going to come along with this. But if there are medical expenses or funeral expenses, counseling that's needed, those are the types of things that we can do. We find that the impacts will be greatly lessened if you can provide some services. And as Dan pointed out, a lot of what we're talking about here today applies beyond an excessive use of. And so as we're looking through each of these things, I'm turning my head. We're going to move to yep. Looking at this. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dan.
Jim, we got a question here. If you have an excessive force situation, your administration has caught the incident when they reviewed their use of force documentation. Would you still need to call an outside person to investigate that?
The advantage of the outside, I will answer, first and simple answer is yes. And the reason is if you do the investigation internally, if the police investigate the police, there's going to be a question of a cover up. That's going to be an allegation you're going to hear constantly. The GBI investigated the police department and said there's nothing there. That provides protection for everyone in the process. Yes, you can do it yourself, but you open yourself up to that particular problem if you don't bring in that outside third party. If there's follow-up questions, certainly glad to field it. That. So we've been talking about question number one. Now let's get to number two. This is going to be dealing with the investigation, with protests and statements. This need of an investigation, and Dan's question and whoever asked it set it up, got to be able to refer those away. That gives you a breathing period because immediately after an excessive use of force, you're going to be under a microscope per entity. And that in every story, every report is going to bring more reporters and more pressure and more groups that can organize on behalf of people who live where you are. So you've got to be able to focus on that. Now, once the report has finished, make that report public. If it says you did something wrong, you did something wrong. If it says you didn't do something wrong, then you have protection. Then we make decisions and take actions based upon that report. So, Billy Bob did it, and I like Billy Bob, and so I just covered it up. We do not want to put anyone in that situation. By the way, I've grown up in the South, and I've never known anybody named Billy. So the need for an investigation provides you that cover. There are going to be protests. There's an allegation of excessive use of force. Whether it's true or not, you're going to have people coming. They're going to want to have a rally. They're going to want to do a demonstration. So you now need to start thinking about what are our rules? If someone's coming to do that, do they need a permit? How do they get it? You don't want to repress them, but you want to make sure that you follow procedures correctly. Will affect the media, and third parties will come with agendas. There are going to be signs that say horrible things. There's going to be cameras and videos, and they do an interview, and they're looking for somebody who is very upset and very emotional, and that's going to be the visual and oral image associated with your entity. Don't have the public officials attend the protest, the march, or the rally. Police need to monitor it, at least from a control standpoint. You might ask for a surrounding county or a different city to send their police to keep your people out of it because your group is the one that's being questioned. Or the GBI can respond, plan about that. We worked with one of the towns that was experiencing this, and they coordinated with all the surrounding counties, and they had it all together, and they were anticipating they would have to have mass arrest, and how do you deal with it? Where do you put them? Those are the types of details that you need to think about there. If possible, identify leaders of the public response and ask them what assistance they need. Because no one really wants to put people at risk. And if there's some way that you can reach through the barriers that are created, that's another way that we can de-escalate. Now, statements. Media wants something from and they want a story to report on, and leadership has got to come in. And I hate the phrase no comment. In America today, if you say no comment, means I did it and I know it, and that's instead communicate with the stakeholders via email, your organization's website, and social media channels. If you have, if you feel that there's so much pressure that we need to make a statement, review the statement with legal counsel, the insurance, your crisis manager or coach at that point, and then post that statement on the website and direct it. So we need a comment. Go to the website. There's their statement. Some of you are using Facebook in that light. You post things regularly and have historically done it. That's another place that you post it. That's much better than just sending it out because who knows what comes from. The other aspect is, and I don't want you to even grant a conversation on or off the record with a reporter, because if the reporter says, well, I met with Dan Beck today, and then they make a statement and it sounds like Dan made that statement. He didn't. I know that's shocking in today's world. Don't meet with them. They won't have that opportunity. If someone wants to know something, direct them to what you've agreed is your statement and put it up there. I would recommend in the South that we have a faith-based community outreach. The local leadership, they do not want to see trauma and drama, these events coming in, and then focus on what our communication themes are. And we'll talk about that as we continue. And you have your home base and message maps. Again, that training that I talked about with crisis coordinator teaches you how to build the 3 home bases. This doesn't, what defines us is your mission and vision, not what has occurred. We're going to invent the future so that this type of a problem cannot happen again. And then finally, our concern today is to help those. Tell them what you want them to hear. What I can tell you is this: that's much better than no comment. So I'm sure you can understand we can't talk about an ongoing legal investigation. Only state facts. In my opinion, Bobby would have never done this. You know what? I don't care about you. Don't do it. I think, I believe, I assume, I feel. State specific facts. Bobby working today. Yes. The fact. Those are things that we want to be able to make sure that we stick to. Communications themes, care and trust. Show compassion and care in all our communications. Communications must build and maintain trust. Often it's needed to be restored through accurate communications. If we make a wrong statement, it's going to hurt and escalate this crisis. Everything that we just talked about here applies beyond an excessive use of force. Communicate with confidence. Communicate instill a level of confidence and leadership's ability to manage the event. Working with the GBI to understand, we coordinated with, demonstrate the capabilities. They made the decision to bring in these outside resources, giving leadership. Those things will build confidence in the communications and that we have in place. Cooperate and collaborate. Work to gain their cooperation. Share. Anybody knows anything? Anybody has a video? Please share it with us. Their cooperation is important, and encourage internal and external stakeholder collaboration. If you know anybody that's having a hard time with this, let us know. We'll be glad to try to help and come into place. Now, the rest of that checklist, number 2 more parts of it. You need this investigation. Want to refer all questions to it. Wait for the report. That's going to be one of the harder things you're going to do because you turned it over weeks ago and you haven't heard anything back. What are we doing? You just keep directing them to the GBI and working through it. Protest. Is a permit required? If it is there any way that you can make that easier? Because if you deny the permit, that's going to be another trigger to indicate an escalation. You've got to expect the media is going to come and third parties, the group that is representing those that they feel they've been impacted on a state level or in some cases a national level. By the way, our focus is local, always first. Responding with GMA to a group that had a problem. And someone in that town said, well, we were the lead story in the Minnesota newspaper's story today. Well, I'm not really concerned about Minnesota because those people are not in Georgia. So it's more of what's happening here versus what's happening outside the country. Don't have them. And if you bring one of your leaders to that event, they're going to be a target for the media and protesters to focus on. Now I have a protection issue to deal with. Statements. They're always going to be looking for a statement. They want something controversial. Only deal with them in writing, having it posted so everyone can see. Dealt with school shooting, and we posted the information. The media had to read it off of the website of the statement. That way, at least we know the information went out, and our stakeholders got that information exactly the way we wanted it to happen. If you get new information, upload new statements. All politics is local. That's an old typical Neil quote. News stories don't travel thousands of miles away and that are going to matter to us here. Faith-based community is a key resource. Media controversy. Develop these communications themes that we've been talking about. And you can work on today home-based message maps. And while we're focused on excessive use of force today, be something else tomorrow. So plan what the message would be. If there was an allegation that there was discrimination or financial judiciary issues. Here's some general tips. These work beyond an excessive use of force. Every crisis needs a general. Somebody's got to be important, responsible for making the ultimate call. You know your county, you know your town. Someone needs to be that general in handling it. And so that person is going to ultimately need to make the call. We're not going to put it to a vote and say, what does everybody think? You get all the information, and it ultimately needs to come down to a person to make those decisions. Every crisis is a human. We're talking about people. We're talking about their lives. We're talking about their homes, their safety. Failure to identify the stakeholders. Is it a neighborhood? Is it a part of town? Is it a particular demographic? Who are our stakeholders? What are they concerned about? Third-party independent investigation. Turn it over. We had a problem that was not an excessive use of force. Another department. There's somebody at the state level that has oversight. Turned out there was. So we had them do the investigation to take the pressure off of. I shared this tip earlier. If someone wants to speak, ask them why. Somebody says, well, we need to talk about this. Ask them, why do we need to talk? Repeat that. And if you do it the first time, good reason. Second time, not so good. Third time, it starts to fall apart. I will tell you, I've only found one time that I was able to ask why 5 times. They gave great answers and we spoke. That's one out of every crisis that we've handled, and we've handled thousands. So that's the rare animal. Then if you are going to speak, what's being done? What do people need to do? Target the response directly to the stakeholders. Don't go to the media. You don't need to go to the media and say, would you tell everybody this? You need to get it out. The only time you would go to the media if you had an alert that you had to get out immediately. We already know the mass notifications. Yeah, below message. Associated with someone. Use the entity or Facebook page, web page, or the Facebook. Take messages to the media. Employees are not spokesperson. They need to be reminded annually, all your employees, that they're not a spokesperson for your city, county. Media training would be good, helping in targeted messaging around it, and doing that in time of peace as opposed to time of war when you've got this event that's occurring. Don't use no comment. No comment means we're guilty. And as you can appreciate, I can tell you, and that's what our messages are. What defines us. That's our entity's mission, and our commitment to continuous improvement, as described, our thoughts and prayers, those that are in. And then monitor open intelligence. That's going to tell you what you need to address, where the problem come in. Now, here's a couple of quick tools that you've got available. Unfortunately, these tools are available to you. Now, I know that's a big problem for you, that you probably don't have a budget that handle free, but that's where it comes. 4 crisis stages: before, imminent, during, and after. Certified crisis coordinator is there at the before, recognize, there's something that doesn't look good that might turn into a problem, to identify those that are likely to escalate, and then to tell leadership. That's the role that that crisis coordinator plays in their training. Also built into BCRA, which is the next tool, it takes each of those 4 stages, gives you things like, here's how you develop a crisis management plan. Here's how you develop your communications. Here's the training that everyone needs to have. And then it steps you through that, or here's what you can do to prevent this from escalating. BCRA's function is to tell you, what decisions do you need to make? What actions do you need to take? What words do you need to use? So working together with GMA and ACCG and LGRMS, these tools have been developed so that they are tailored to local government market. Now, I've said this multiple times, but it's different before, imminent, during, and after. Before, we're working on planning and training. Imminent, we're trying to mitigate or prevent. Many times, if we hear a circumstance that this could escalate into crisis, not a crisis yet, but it could, if we intervene at that time and we can keep it, you'll notice that half of this is before anything has occurred. Half is after, during. How do we regain control? What are our decisions, actions, and rules during that crisis event? And then what resources do we have to restore control and return? If you have an excessive use of force event, that's going to change how you operate and be done. A little more clarification. This is the crisis coordinator, certified crisis coordinator program. Recognize that something requires further information to rule out an issue, identify what needs to be done at the potential to escalate, alert leadership of your analysis so they can take the steps. Old insurance term, late notice. You knew there was a problem. Why didn't you tell us so we could fix it? That's what a crisis coordinator, certified crisis coordinator, has been trying to do. That VCRA that I talked about, it's a decision tool. It focuses on decisions, actions, and words. It's available 24/7. Simple question, menu-driven documents, and tools. It says, which one of these 4 stages are you in? There's animations that come through and explain it. So once you select that, you prepare before, to assist when it's imminent, to respond during, and recover after. And then once you come to that, you kick up another, and you go into one of the areas. This one is telling us an analysis of what's happened. Where do we start? Step-by-step activities done, associated with it. And there's a menu to select what crisis that you're facing, so that it would be different if you're looking at something that was financial versus another impact. It's as simple as going in. Here's a checklist to get control. Here's a quick response reference guide. What can you say immediately? Where do you need to start? It's menu driven. So you just push on that and the system routes you what you need to have with each exposure, and it's exposure specific. There is one as it uses. Now, we covered a lot of ground and we're 5 minutes under the 1 hour that we promised. I want to close with this thought, and then if we've had more questions, think about your questions, type them in. Dan will ask them in a moment. But we've all heard of the Miranda warning. You have the right to remain silent. It's guaranteed and protected for all. But one of the things I want you to do is to think about a crisis Miranda. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of public opinion. You have the right to a crisis manager. Cannot afford a crisis manager. Crisis Risk Firestorm, that's our company, will provide one for you. Do you understand the rights that I've read to you? With those rights in mind, do you wish to speak to a crisis coach now? Complaining you're losing. Started with that comment, and that's the comment I want to leave you with. All of these things, better off understanding the facts before we speak and have a unified plan and come through. Dan, I didn't see any questions come through. Does this trigger any questions that you want to ask?
Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask? The questions that I asked James during the presentation were questions from the audience, but does anybody have any questions or comments they want to share?
Dan's recording this, so you would be able to get a copy of this in this presentation today if there's someone internal in your organization that. So that's one of the advantages of the services that your membership gets you, and I think you focus on. Fortunately, this is a real exposure in today's world. There's people that are very angry about it, people that are looking to blame people, and people that are concerned about their safety going. You remember the crisis ABCs that will give you a beginning format to analyze these things. Dan, I think a question came.
Yep. Social media is the biggest firestorm in any UOF. Do you ignore or engage with erroneous information?
I'm going to engage, but differently than the person who wrote that. We need to know what's being said, because that's where the attacks are going to be coming from, associating with it. If we start to respond back to it, it's going to encourage more comment and coming forward. So we want to monitor it. You can, as part of the training, you can do an open source Google search and have it set up. Whereas this phrase associated with your entity appearing, where is it coming? And if it's open source, we'll be picking it up. So if we know what's being said, then we can understand where the problem is coming next. That's the true value for us, is understanding what are people saying, what are they concerned about, what's going to happen next, and those elements would come in. So I would monitor but not respond in that medium. But if you continue to look, it'll continue to build over time. And what we've seen is that I've seen elected officials failing to respond, and it's exacerbated the problem very quickly. Started to get them. The people that are posting some of those things are looking for that mistake. There's been a misstatement made. I didn't say it in this, and I assumed it, but that's probably my mistake. We're only going to tell the truth. If you lie in any of these crisis environments, that's going to come out. That's going to create a secondary crisis, may even be larger than the first one started from this standpoint. Back to you, Dan.
Say, any other questions or comments? Good question. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all those that attended. As Jim said, we will be sending out a recording, a link to the recording to all those that attended today. Well, all of those that registered today. And we're happy to send it out to anybody else that you think would like to hear from us. So please give me a call if you have any questions. If not, thank you so much. Again, thank you, Jim. Great job, as always. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.